ever feel like that word autism? It's like, we use it, but do we really get it? Like, what does it actually mean for, you know, people living it every day?
It's interesting, right? We've come a long way from this idea of autism as like one thing you either have or you don't.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of getting at, this whole spectrum idea. What makes it a spectrum, not just like a condition?
It's all about how your brain processes the world, and that's different for everyone. Think about like your senses, sight, sound, the way things feel, then communication, how you're social, autisms and all that, but in totally unique ways.
So two people on the spectrum could be having really different experiences.
Oh, absolutely. One person might have trouble with, say, spoken language, right? But then someone else, it's textures, certain sounds that just overload them. And yet another person, they might have this intense focus, making them amazing at, like, coding. That's the spectrum.
Wow. So then how do you even diagnose something like that? Is there a blood test, a brain scan that just says it?
You'd think, right? But it's not that simple. One expert we read, they were really big on how diagnosis is about observation, and it takes time.
So no autism test like, bummer, take this quiz online.
Nope. Doctors, specialists, they're looking for patterns. Speech development's different, how a kid interacts socially, if they have certain behaviors that repeat a lot. Those are starting
So
points.
like those lists you see online, early signs of autism, that's not a diagnosis waiting to happen.
Right. They might mean it's worth talking to a professional, getting an evaluation, because some of those things, like trouble with eye contact, or maybe a kid loves routines, that can be totally normal, or it could be something else entirely.
It's a puzzle, not just check marks on a list.
Exactly. And that's probably why there's so much, like, misunderstanding around autism.
Yeah.
It's not a yes or no thing, so people try to fill in the blanks, and often it's not accurate, like that whole thing about autistic people not having emotions. Yeah, big misconception there. And this is where that spectrum idea is huge again. We read studies, research, all saying there's a vast range of cognitive abilities within the autism spectrum.
So you could have a brilliant scientist who's on the spectrum, an amazing artist.
A podcast host, maybe?
Hey, I
Yeah.
was going to say that. But seriously, this idea that autism is like a disadvantage, that's just wrong, right?
100%. It's about neurodiversity. Different doesn't equal deficient. It's just a different way of being wired.
I like that. Wire differently. Because when you approach it that way, you start to see the strengths, right?
Yeah.
The things that often come along with autism that are amazing.
It's like their brains are just wired for deep dives, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not exactly like ours, haha, but yeah, that focus, it's remarkable.
So what else? What other strengths really jumped out at you from all this research?
Well, a lot of times that focus goes with this, like love of routines, structure. We might see it as rigid, because we like to mix things up. But for someone on the spectrum, that predictability, it's grounding. You know what I mean? Like it makes their world feel stable.
Makes sense. When you think about how overwhelming the world can be for, like, your senses, if you're on the spectrum,
Yeah.
routines must be super comforting.
Totally. And then on top of that, you've got these incredible talents that come from thinking differently. The research talked a lot about like computer programming, engineering, math, areas where that detail-oriented pattern recognizing brain just thrives.
And we see amazing autistic musicians, artists, writers.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, right? Some of the biggest geniuses in history, maybe they were on the spectrum, seeing the world differently.
Right. It's a cool thought. But gotta be careful we're not saying these strengths are guaranteed, just like any human trait, right? And alongside them, there are challenges. Gotta acknowledge those if we're serious about being inclusive.
So it's both recognizing the strengths, celebrating them even, but then being aware of the challenges, being supportive.
Exactly. And just like the strengths, the challenges are different for everyone. We mentioned sensory stuff earlier, a loud room, bright lights. Most people don't even blink. But for someone on the spectrum, it's overwhelming.
And it's not just loud or bright, right? Some folks,
Uh-huh.
it's touch, certain textures, like their senses are just amplified.
Exactly. Then you've got the social side of things. Imagine feeling like you're always misinterpreting signals, missing cues everyone else seems to get. That's what social interaction can feel like for some autistic people.
Sounds incredibly isolating.
It can be. And on top of that, you've got the communication aspect. For some, it's language itself that's tough. For others, it's the nonverbal stuff. Facial expressions, body language, really hard to navigate.
We really do take a lot for granted in how we communicate, don't we? So how do we bridge that gap, go from just knowing about autism to actually making the world more inclusive?
It's got to start with a mindset shift. We've got to stop seeing autism as something to fix and start seeing it as a different way of being that deserves understanding, respect.
Less about changing people on the spectrum, more about changing the world to fit them better.
100%. One expert even said that true inclusivity means designing like everything environment systems with neurodiversity in mind from the get-go.
Sounds like a tall order. But there's got to be stuff we can all do, right? Like our listener right now, what's one thing they could do in their life to be more inclusive?
Sometimes it's as simple as asking, hey, is there anything I can do to make this environment better for you? Or are there any sensory things I should be aware of?
Simple, but powerful. You're showing you care enough to make the effort.
Right. And sometimes, yeah, it might take more effort, but it's worth it. A more welcoming world for everyone, that's the goal.
So going beyond awareness to action, putting it into practice.
Exactly. Maybe that's advocating for sensory-friendly spaces in public, learning about different ways people communicate, or just being patient, understanding when someone interacts differently.
Sounds like it all comes down to empathy, doesn't it? Seeing the world through someone else's eyes. Even if they see it differently than us, it's like we're not just trying to make people on the spectrum fit in. We're trying to expand what fitting in even means. Right?
Yeah. And one thing that really came through in what we read is that, inclusivity isn't charity, right? It's not just about making people comfortable. It's about recognizing that autistic people bring value, like real value.
Totally. We were just talking about those strengths, that focus, the details, seeing the world differently. That can lead to some amazing stuff.
No doubt. There was this one study, right? Companies that were really going for neurodiversity, like making it a priority, they were way more likely to be innovative, better problem solving, all that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
If everyone thinks the same way, you're going to miss out on a lot of good ideas.
Exactly. Different perspectives, they're essential if you want to tackle the big stuff, the complex problems, and just build a better world for everyone, you know?
It's like they say, if you're the smartest person in the room.
You're in the wrong room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need those different ways of thinking to push us, make us better.
And autism, the more you learn about it, it's it makes you realize how limited our idea of normal really is.
This deep dive has been mind-blowing, seriously. So for our listener out there, they're hooked, they want more, where should they go from here?
Honestly, go straight to the source. Find autistic creators, writers, podcasters. There's so much out there sharing their experiences directly.
Way more powerful than us just talking about it, right?
Yeah.
To hear those voices, those stories.
For sure. And you start to see behind every diagnosis, it's a whole person.
With their own way of being in the world, their own strengths, their own challenges.
Autism isn't one thing, it's a whole spectrum, like we keep saying. And within that, there's so much to learn, so much to appreciate.
So if you're listening, take this as a starting point. Keep learning, challenge those assumptions you might have, and listen to those different voices out there. That's how we build a better world, one conversation, one deep dive at a time.